a few years ago, I
need the microphone? Yeah, can you take the microphone? Oh. Okay. Is it not working? Good morning and welcome to day 3 of Zagreb Digital Nomad Week. We are live streaming here from Hub 385 in Zagreb, one of the wonderful co-working spaces you can enjoy here as a digital nomad. We have a special session today. We're going to have a range of digital nomads giving us remote careers advice. So a lot of people are wondering how they might become a digital nomad or how people are balancing this lifestyle, some tips or hacks or permits such as the one Croatia offers. We have a few digital nomads in the audience today, and we invite you, if you are not watching this via Hopin, you might be watching it on the YouTube live stream from the Zagreb Tourist Board or Total Croatia's Facebook live stream. But jump onto Hopin, the link will be up throughout the stream, because that's the opportunity you'll have to send your own questions in. So that's for this session now, for our fireside, and also later today at 12:30 with a panel of virtual digital nomads. To my left here, I have Ron Tardif, who is a digital nomad from the USA, and Christy Sullivan, who's traveling the world with her husband. So I'm going to send it over to Ron to introduce the session. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Tanya. So today we're going to just chat about our remote career experience. And I think the best way to kick things off would just be to tell a little bit about what it is that we do, where we've been working, and how we've become remote workers.
Sure.
So I'll leave it to you to start.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm great meeting you, sharing my story because it's something I'm really passionate about. I was working, I'm originally from Minnesota in the US, and I started working for a software company in Virginia. So I moved about 5 or 6 years ago. And then in the course of working through there, I realized I wanted to turn that my passion, of traveling into something that I do every day. And so I was sitting in a women's in leadership meeting, and excuse me, and I realized that people were talking about what their passions were and their dreams. And so I said, I just like blurted out without even thinking about it. I was like, I want to travel and live for at least a month somewhere internationally. And it kind of like, it was like I blacked out when I said it. And then like, I thought, oh my gosh, there was like leadership in the room and stuff like that. But I had said it, and I think that at that point, it just kicked off for me in my head. I needed to make this a reality. So then from that moment on, I started thinking about ways, like how could I make this happen? I had joined a goal planning mastermind, like a 6-week course thing, and then and then defining the milestones to get there. So I kind of put a plan in place.
Oh, wow.
And then, and the biggest part for me was going to be, so I guess rewind, I have been in accounting and finance, corporate accounting and finance for like 20 years. So I had very like kind of boring career, but it was steady and, reliable salary and all that. So for me, the biggest thing was going to be to figure out like how I was going to pay for it. Like that was my biggest concern. And so as part of this planning journey that I had, I was figuring out how to save money, how to like sell what I could to make more money. So I had a big pot of savings to live off of for a while. And then I just thought, well, I'll just have to figure it out. Like, I just want to like have some money to live off of and hope I figure it out. Because one of my biggest fears was I would be on my deathbed and I would always wonder, what if I had done this? Like I don't want to have to wonder what would have happened. Like, could I have made it? What would have happened? That kind of thing. So I needed to make it happen. So, so then I had saved all this money. It probably took me like a year or two to save up what I thought was a comfortable amount. And then the last thing I needed to do was figure out a way to have my job that I was doing be fully remote. So I kind of had a plan in place where it was like, I want to talk to my leadership about getting that job to kind of transition it to fully remote. And so I that had dragged my heels on that one because I was nervous about if they were just going to like fire me if I asked to be fully remote.
Were there any people at your company
Yes,
already?
that's a great, yes. So that was one of the reasons, was that our whole C-suite was already remote. So I was in Virginia working in the corporate office, but the C-suite was all in Atlanta. So it was sort of like, seemed like it wasn't that far-fetched of a request, but I wasn't quite sure exactly how they would handle it. And then interestingly, when I was initially hired for the position, I was still in Minnesota. So they hired me remote
before,
and then moved. But, and then, so I was kind of had this plan to switch, to ask, to make that request, thinking with the worst case scenario, they're going to fire me. So I kind of was like, well, I'll just, so anyways, I was going to, April 1st, 2020 was going to be the day I was going to ask. And then a couple of weeks before that is when the pandemic hit. And I thought, oh, I need to see, like, let this play out a little bit and figure it out. And so then our office closed with the pandemic, and then everyone was remote. And I thought, this could be like the perfect opportunity, because, and that's exactly how it played out. It was like we all were working remotely, and it was fine. Like, it was totally fine. So then after a couple of months, I thought, you know what, I just got to do this. Let me just ask my leadership to make this remote. We've just proven that we can do it. Why shouldn't I be able to continue? So I sent an email, and I didn't hear anything for like 3 weeks from anybody. They were like, oh, we're still talking about it. And I'm kind of like, okay. And then I get a meeting invite from the COO of our company and wanting to meet with me on a Friday afternoon at 4:00. And I was thinking, I'm totally getting fired. And so I'm thinking about this, and I'm talking to like my husband about it, and thank you. and he said, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Because he knows I'm nervous about it. And he's like, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and you're like, but
you prepare for that.
Yeah, you've kind of been talking about that for a year now. So that meeting happens, and he says, well, we're eliminating your job. And it was like, wow, okay. And then he says, and we can offer you a severance package, or we've created this new position, which is exactly the same responsibilities that you have today, except 30% less pay.
Wow.
And so I was like, give me the weekend to think about it. And it didn't take me long. And it was like, this is like the universe was telling me, giving me that opportunity. So that is the kind of like how so then I took the severance package, and we were traveling within a couple of weeks of that. My last day, we were in Serbia. And so we had traveled around in Serbia and came to Croatia last year. So this all transpired in the last year or so. So that's so now Croatia, we lived in Mexico. Now we're back because we love Croatia. But we're working remotely. I started a travel blog to kind of document my journey. And as this last year has elapsed, I've kind of realized that there's opportunities for helping people to like travel and work remotely. So we're finding a lot of challenges as we're going along in our journey of traveling and trying to work. It's very time consuming. So if there's things I can do to kind of help. So I've just started a company. It's called Executive Remote Workers, and it's an online community to help business professionals who want to travel and work remotely. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of a long story.
But it's, I think I've actually heard some similar stories over the past year. And I was actually just reading this morning that a record number of Americans, 4 million Americans in April, quit their job. And one of the top 3 reasons for that was because they want to stay working from home. So I
believe it.
So I think that now that there's this a crunch in the recovery in certain countries for remote workers, they have a lot more leverage. And some companies are being a bit aggressive, whereas others are not. So I think it's a really good example that you're setting for a lot of people who are interested.
Yeah, there's definitely, they're kind of like coming to blows now with like the employers that want to call people back to the office versus the employees that want to stay working remotely. And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I get it. And then I think there's pros and cons to both sides.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think so. So
Yeah.
I'm interested in your story.
My own story is that I spent a lot of years studying. So I'm a marine ecologist. So I study marine environments, particularly fisheries and aquaculture. And I've studied in 7 or 8 countries. So after I had finished, I had done an Erasmus Mundus Master's. So by default, it was traveling. So I spent a semester in Scotland and then in Greece, then did an internship in the Netherlands, then went to France, then did my thesis in China. And so after that 2 years of consistent traveling, before that, I had worked for a year for an NGO, and I moved out to San Francisco to do that. The pay certainly was not worth the San Francisco move, let's say. But in any case, I had done that and I had experienced that, and I really thought it was quite pointless that I was there. I mean, it was a good experience because I wanted to visit California. I had never been before, coming from Connecticut, and I did want to meet my colleagues and such. But after about 6 months of that, I was like, okay, my boss just moved to Hawaii. My other boss is on the East Coast, is in Seattle. Why am I in an office? I talked to 2 of my colleagues at lunch, and the rest of the time I'm on my computer anyway.
Yep.
And so knowing that, when I left that contract, I went and did my master's and had this traveling experience. And so I really was back in Greece on Crete, and nobody really wants to leave Crete once they're there. So I was looking for any way that I could continue staying there, and being an American, being able to work for American companies was quite a strong advantage because obviously even a part-time salary there is a lot stronger in Greece. So I was able to just start working right away for a small NGO, also based in San Francisco, part-time for about 10 hours a week. And it was actually enough to sort of be fine, not really great salary, but on 10 hours a week, but it was still fine in Greece. So, and then basically in that, after 2 months, they really needed more of my time. So then it went up to 20 hours. And then we delivered a big event in Oslo. And then it went up to basically full-time consultant, or mostly full-time. And actually, I was the first fully remote full-time person to come onto the team. And it wasn't even actually that well supported in a way, because they wanted everybody to be mostly based in San Francisco for team culture or whatever. Although that was in December of 2019, so just 6 months later, that mentality changed quite quickly when the office was closed permanently. So, but basically, I realized that, and even now, I've since left that organization, and so now I'm working a bit more freelancing for a couple of different organizations, including one based in Greece. That actually, one strategy, especially because I'm at the other end of my career, beginning compared with you, is to actually work a bit. Work remotely first is a really good strategy. And even if it's less hours, if you can demonstrate your impact in that time, it makes that remote working barrier much lower. So that's been my experience. And so I worked for them very successfully for 2 years. It was a bit weird that some of my colleagues I never met, and some in person, and some of them I only met 3 times in person, and yet they're still like really good friends. We talked every day. So it really is possible to build a team culture. I think this was a big recurring objection that I hear and I see among even NGOs, which you'd think would be a little bit more progressive, where they're saying, oh, we need this kind of office culture or things like that. I don't know. Part of me thinks it's a bit lazy to do that, because I've seen and experienced culture develop remotely really fine. And I've seen bad culture develop in person as well. So I don't necessarily think that the in-person or remote thing is the biggest factor of that culture piece that tends to be a big barrier.
Yeah, that's a great point. That culture can be bad and toxic in an office as well as remotely, because I know that's what a lot of organizations, the leadership of organizations are saying, is that they need to have that culture. So and that's why they want the in-office, the staff in the office working. But yeah, that's a fair point. I think there's just going to be ways to be more. They're going to have to be more creative about how they build that culture. I suspect that you've already experienced that in your more distributed working experience.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do. Virtual happy hours. In my core team, we like to start our meetings with a 15-minute meditation. We had different sort of working agreements or arrangements. We had both. We liked to also start sort of like, one of my favorite things is tell me how you're doing with feeling words. So like I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling happy, which is, it's a bit weird. I think it's a bit uncomfortable at first, but then you realize that when you have sort of an emotional or personal vulnerability with your colleagues, that's actually what's building culture, because you can just, yeah, exactly. So, and then also just trying to build a bit more water cooler conversation at the beginning or at the end of meetings. And it's actually not the most efficient way to run a meeting. But when it's all remote, it actually is an efficient use of time. Maybe not to solve that specific problem, but to make sure that there's a good rapport with colleagues. But being a bit more career focused, now that you're remote, are you still working in accounting and finance, and or trying to? And how's your experience finding clients? Because I think a lot of remote workers are client based, and so I think maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about.
No, it's a great question.
How do we get some work?
I think what I'm finding is it's interesting. I think you have some people who are more like employees that are working remotely. Like in the US, we call them W-2 employees. And then you have like more that freelancer type where they have to find their own customers or clients to help and so on, right? As of now, I'm not really doing any accounting or finance. I am living off my savings that I had planned for. However, I have, as you could imagine, over 20 years of corporate accounting and finance experience and in the software industry and so on, right? I've accumulated a pretty good network of people. So I have reached out and things are in the works for maybe doing some. They know my whole story. They know my, experience. They know I'm traveling. They know they're prepared for all of that, and they're okay with that. So if there's things in the works so leveraging my network to kind of find that maybe ad hoc work or part-time work or just as needed, to fill in some things. They know I'm available. I don't really want to commit because then I'm traveling. I don't want to commit too much, right? And then, so as far as work is concerned, is just managing the travel blog, and then starting this online community to help the business professionals travel and work remotely. So that's like kind of how I spend my time. As I build, it'll be interesting over the course of the next few months as this community grows, how I'm going to be leveraging that. I'll be definitely leveraging from some of the things that I've learned at this conference for how to like capture more client base just from using things like social media, like LinkedIn and stuff. So that'll be a big one for me because my ideal customer is going to be a business professional. So that would make sense.
Yeah, I want to also emphasize. I want to also emphasize that network building. For example, I just recently, kind of accidentally, got a new contract to support an organization in project writing. And one of the ways that I had gotten it was because I was already pursuing an independent EU funding project proposal. And so they were like, oh, well, if you're doing this, then maybe you can help us do some of those as well. And the only reason that I was even connected with this organization was through some networking event that was held, Blue Ocean Investment platform through the European Union. So networking, if you want to be remote, is absolutely essential, and also being really visible with your network, I found is really important. So because I am quite active on LinkedIn as well, people kind of recognize me and my content. So even if I message, for example, someone I'm connected with, but I've never met, and it was super warm, they were super helpful. And actually through that, I got into some discussions about joining their consulting organizations as well if they get a relevant project. So I've had a couple of really warm conversations through LinkedIn and through network building, which I found really important.
Absolutely.
I wanted to also ask about your husband.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think a lot of people are traveling, business professionals are traveling with partners. So what was that like that experience like for him? Was he in a similar position, or already had something?
Yeah. So actually that's interesting. We met when we worked at a software company together in different departments. And then he left the organization a couple of years before I did. And he wanted to get into real estate investing. So he had started his own real estate investment company with the intention of wanting to be able to do it from anywhere, to travel, because that was his passion as well. So he built his company up and is now free to manage it remotely. So it's a fully remote company. So having him able to travel really made it a lot easier for both of us to do that together. The people that I know that travel, business professionals, so we're both essentially working as we travel and work. But I know I could envision other couples where maybe one spouse works and the other is kind of manages everything else in their life and so on. So I think there's going to be when traveling with children. And so there's lots of different, I think the pandemic has really changed the landscape of remote working. I think before it was the young backpacker, digital nomad. And now I think that's turned on its side now, and it's just opened to a lot more people. So, I mean, our biggest struggle when we travel together is the fact that we're both working. We need to make sure we just stay like in vacation rentals and stuff. And so we need to make sure that if we're going to stay there for a while, because we have recognized that every time we move is time away from being able to work. So we try and minimize the amount of time that we're working. But so when we're staying, we might get a place for a month. It's like, we need to make sure that this place can like handle two, remote workers. So of course, the Wi-Fi needs to be really strong and reliable. But I think almost more importantly, the accommodations need to like have comfortable workspaces for two people. Like that's different, right? Like,
and it's hard to find in a rental. It's really challenging.
So we're going into listings and trying to figure out like, okay, that kitchen table looks pretty big. You can work, maybe two of us could work in that, or there's a desk, or there's the kitchen table. You can work at the kitchen table, I'll work at the desk, or if there's a balcony, a terrace, maybe I can work there, you can work, so figuring that out seems to be probably one of the most time. And a kitchen, we want a kitchen, time savings again, right? Not having to go out to eat all the time.
And money saving.
And money, exactly. And, the belly and stuff like that too. And then like a washer or some kind of those, just having to figure out every time you go somewhere.
The essential amenities.
That are time consuming.
And how long are you typically staying? Just to frame your digital nomadism?
We are traveling all the time. We basically stay in one place, like one vacation rental, probably on average 3 to 4 weeks at a time.
Okay.
So we're
quite quickly.
Yeah. So we're moving around, but we're not like some of those nomads where it's like every few days they're moving.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I want to cover two more things. We're coming down to the last third. The first one is the kind of elephant in the room, is the cost.
Yes.
So from the American point of view, a lot of professionals are what we might say highly leveraged.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what is your experience and maybe recommendation for other professionals, other Americans, maybe Anglophones, which tend to
Mhm,
have higher debt ratios than other
mhm,
countries, with regards to preparing your finances in that year before
mhm.
becoming a digital nomad? And then someone has also asked sort of how do you deal with the sort of ebbs and flows of the financing?
Yeah,
Sometimes you have a job, a lot of
yeah,
money, and sometimes not.
yeah. The those are great questions. The debt one is interesting because that was one of the reasons where, as I was planning leading up to this, it was like, I'm not going to have a house. I rented, and I knew at that point I could, get out of it, with a notice.
Mhm.
I sold a lot of stuff. I personally pared a lot of my lifestyle way down than I did before. That was really important. I think it's going to depend on people's situations a lot. I know of some, maybe older people like me that are out working and traveling. They still have their house, so they have kind of a home base to go to. You just got to prepare for that financially, that you're going to have costs of maintenance to maintain your house, make your mortgage payment, and so on, right? Or sell it, or maybe you could rent it out. Like,
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of opportunity, even if, because I use the mortgage as the example because that's like the biggest debt in most people, right? Um, I pared down my car, so I don't have a car payment. But with the mortgage, it's like there might be more opportunity to VRBO it, as we say, or put it on Airbnb or whatever, right?
Yep.
So that's a good way to handle that. So it's going to depend on the situation and how much money you have, because you might be able to sustain keeping a house and having that home base and having the money to afford to do that, but you might not. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a big consideration. The other question is about ebbs and flows of money. I haven't necessarily had that yet, experienced that, because I'm still basically living off my savings.
Mhm.
So that hasn't been too much of an issue. I'm not sure if that's something that you have experienced.
Yeah, so my kind of rule has just been to, I kind of divide my income by fifths. So I try to live on the 2/5, and then the 3/5 goes to investments or savings, and other things, so student loans or whatever, which thankfully right now are paused for, for a year and a half. But other than that, I've also been strategic about where I live, and also where I want to live happen to be cheaper countries anyway.
Yes.
Right now I'm in Budapest, and so I don't rent anything luxurious. I have roommates. I don't really need to have some kind of large flat to myself. So just renting a room in Budapest, for example, in a nice flat in the center is maybe 1/10 of the price of something in a similarly large city in the US. But because I'm working for US organizations, I'm still typically getting the same pay that my colleagues in the US would get. But I have, minimized my living costs significantly in that regard. So because of that, if I don't have any kind of contract for 6 months at a time, it's very, very affordable to stay there. And even likewise, before it was in Greece, I've also lived in France, where it's possible. It of course depends on the country a bit, but I think just planning and keeping, being reasonable with how much you're making and how much you're spending, and trying. I would say also, the more consistent you can get it, the easier it is to plan over time. So we're nearing the end. We have some questions, and shout out to Brenda, who's watching from Paris on Facebook.
Yay,
Thank you, Brenda.
wow.
And so I want to ask, this I think is actually one of the most underestimated parts. How have you been able to instill some self-discipline after getting out of office, breaking away from office culture, and becoming, fixing your own schedule, sitting down to do the work, even if you're in a beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think people especially, and then how did you decide to keep a kind of 4-week rhythm versus a 2-week rhythm? Was
Mm-hmm.
that involved?
I think from a discipline perspective, it's interesting because I do not set an alarm except for this morning because I had to be here earlier. But I like that. It has actually worked out well for us because we work a lot, or we do a lot of business um, um, in the US time zone. So being in Europe is kind of nice because you kind of have the morning to just wake up, enjoy breakfast, have some coffee. We would go swim at the beach. And then it's like, oh, it's 3:00. Time to go back because the market's open, there and so on, right? So that's worked out nicely. I think just having like something to do and something to accomplish every day has been important, right? Like we talk about in the morning. My husband's got a software engineering background, and they do stand-ups every morning. That's like a team huddle kind of thing, right? And you talk about like what are the 3 things you want to accomplish today. And so we do that. It's either we're doing that with our coffee in the morning, or we do it with a bottle of wine at night and for the next day, right? You're kind of like you're quickly sort of recapping what you've accomplished in the last day and what you want to accomplish in the next day. So kind of having that. So I think actually as a couple, traveling as a couple might make that easier for us.
You have your own little work culture.
Yes. And it's like
that.
accountability and so on. Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to use that. So that speaks about it. The next question, which is a bit more about remote team culture. So I guess professionally, how do you compensate that you're not in the office with colleagues anymore?
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult one for me because I don't necessarily have colleagues today, but I do have a lot of people that reach out to me and they're asking me questions about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and so on. And I participate a lot in travel forums. So that's a big one, in Facebook groups. So I've almost become like an expert in traveling with the COVID restrictions and all of the entry requirements. You could almost tell me a country and I can tell you what you need to get in and what are the requirements when you're there and so on. So I think I have enjoyed, even though I'm kind of, my background is used to being as part of a team culture, like an in-person culture. I think for me, it's been nice just replicating that almost in an online way. And so I'm talking to people all the time, maybe more than I should, online to like help and stuff like that. So I have found it to be like not that bad. Like that's not a problem for me.
Yeah, it sounds like because you're not sort of required to socialize necessarily with colleagues in your office who may not even relate to you in any way besides you're at the same company.
Yes.
Instead, you have sort of you're searching for that, let's say, professional engagement in the areas where you really are interested.
Yep.
For me, as a marine ecologist, but a lot of the work I was doing at this nonprofit was program management and project management and running a grant program and things like that. But I also, since leaving there, I've been able to spend a lot more time in getting back into sort of the science that I am trained in and attending these webinars and sort of keeping up with those colleagues that I kind of had lost a bit of touch with. So that's been a really interesting, a good opportunity for me.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. We have a question from Marie, who's joining us here live. What research do you do before going to a new location? And does community play any role? How do you meet others while on the go?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack on that question. Thank you, though. And
one addendum. Do you use co-working spaces? Because this was a big thing from our Digital Nomad in Residence program, was about co-working space.
To answer that question, we don't, because one of the things that we have found is from a time perspective, having like being in one place and like just leaving your stuff instead of the idea of packing up. I'm not sure exactly how co-working spaces actually work, but having to like pack up and walk across town or whatever, we have just found it easier to have, like I said, ensure our accommodations can handle both of us working remotely. Now, I could almost see if the time came where I felt like, or if we felt like we needed more social interaction, the co-working space would definitely be the place to go. Maybe perhaps just like a couple times a week or something like that. I could see to getting that need. As far as picking where we go, this is our second time back to Croatia, so we know we really like Croatia, and so we pick our destination. We pick where we go more just from. I want to know how it is to work remotely from different places, so I pick it based on my curiosity to see how well we can work there. I think that's a big one, and then just going to the pub or the cafe for some coffee and hanging out, and I think there's some social interaction if as long as there's not a language barrier. But so that's how much research I guess we do on the location. We do a lot of like the logistical location of how to get, and then so we go here. Then if we go here, then we could go the next month or something. We can go here, and then that's easy, right? Like Croatia, Montenegro, Albania. And then we could work our way, like you can kind of like plot a course in different stays. And it's like, well, we could stay 90 days here, and then we can stay another, and so on, right?
So you're doing this all without the permit, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So your travel is sort of bound by that.
Yes, exactly. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah, I have a also shout out to John Anthony, who's watching from Florida and will be joining us in Croatia in 51 days. Congratulations.
Interestingly, we moved. So when I sold as much as I could, what I couldn't sell is in storage in Florida. So, so I'm kind of a Florida resident. My driver's license says Florida. So.
Nice. Yeah, in my experience, I've really enjoyed co-working from my end. I hadn't used it before, but when I sort of ended up in Budapest for force majeure because I needed a European residency after some COVID drama, and then met my girlfriend there. So now I'm there. But yeah, so I've enjoyed the co-working space, and for me, it adds structure because I'm at my own house. So being just by myself, it's a bit harder to have the same boundaries. So, walking the 20 minutes to the office and kind of, just I only go twice a week maximum just to break the monotony of staring at my walls all the time. So I've really enjoyed that. And there are some great co-workings around the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's maybe another thing with my experience is that we're a couple. So we can talk to each other all the time. So you get that? Yeah, I could. If it was solo, I would struggle with that social interaction.
And I think it's also what you said about, you a place that you like, so you've come back here again. For me, I'm going to Greece next week again. I've been there. I'm there quite often, so I'll be there for close to a month. And I'm sure I'll be back later in the year. And but then we have our next destinations planned, and we'll be in Morocco in early 2022, hopefully. And then I have a wedding in Spain, so we're going to spend some months there. So it's kind of like as life happens, so we can kind of build our travel destinations around there. But we're at time, so I just want to. I thought maybe we could each share. One really nice question. Oh, we have one more question from Brenda, our friend from Paris, which is: language is a major step into societal integration. How do you deal with language barriers? And when you decide to set up in a new place, especially with a difficult language like Croatian?
Yeah, Serbia was really hard. Serbia was hard because a lot of people spoke English, but a lot of people didn't speak English. So, there's a lot of gesturing, like hand gestures, and Google Translate has been a big one. even when we were in Mexico. So I had taken in high school and college a couple of Spanish classes, so I knew a little bit, and a lot of people there spoke English, and I spoke a little Spanish, so together you could kind of like make it work. But there were times where you had to pull out Google Translate and like type something out and then show it to them. And we did that a lot in certain places. It was just like back and forth. Like she would type something and show me, that kind of thing. So you kind of figure your way around. I personally, I had mentioned I'd bought in like the audiobooks to learn Spanish, and now I have the audiobook to learn Croatian. We'll see how that goes, at least to have a couple, I think when you travel places, to have some basic polite things to say or ask for, or having some of those words and phrases available will get you a long way. And I'm very impressed in Croatia how well people speak English, and it hasn't really been much of an issue.
Yeah, this is one of the more English prevalent countries, certainly in its part of Europe. Greece is similar. I've actually been very surprised at Hungary. There's a lot of people who don't speak English. That you'd think that there would be more, since only Hungarians speak Hungarian. But actually, it's been a bit challenging in a way. But thankfully, Budapest is super international, so there's lots of internationals around. But yeah, it can be a bit of a struggle. But I would say that in general, if the many digital nomads, if the place is really not English friendly or has a sort of other accessible languages like German or French or Spanish, then you're most likely going to kind of gravitate towards the international community in that sense. So I guess what advice would you give, for your community of corporate professionals? What's your one or two key things?
I think it comes down to just do it. And I think yesterday Taki said that, like in his presentation, he was like to Jan, it was like, just do it. Be remote, do it. This is awesome. Like there's challenges, there's pros and cons, but to me, in my opinion, it just completely outweighs it. Just figure out how to make it happen for you in your situation. Find the right resources. Like anyone is, I'm happy to help anybody. Like they can reach out to me and I'll help them. I can share my experience, how I think it could work for them. I'll help them in any way I can to make this happen, because it's amazing. I think, like, I'm just really excited about it. So
it's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the team will share your information and how to get in touch with you with the event. From my side, I would just add that one of our fellow Dubrovnik digital nomads in residence, Zoli, a photographer from Hungary, he said that he thinks in action. So he just does the first step, and then the next steps becomes obvious once you've started to do the first step, rather than trying to sort of plan for everything that could go wrong or every kind of problem that will come. Just do the first thing, and then the next thing will be obvious. So I thought that was really good advice. He says he doesn't worry about anything else. He just
beyond
does the
that
first
one step,
just the
and
first
not
step.
trying to boil the ocean. Right?
It's
exactly.
Like, so I would steal his advice and share that, because he's an excellent digital nomad. And then just from a really career-oriented perspective, I can't overemphasize networking.
Yes, 100%.
I think a lot of digital nomads are not going to be W-2 employees, so freelancing, client-based, you have to network and you have to be active and sort of demonstrate that you know what you're doing, demonstrate that you're engaged, you're involved, you're staying on top of things, even though you're not in a workplace. So I think that's really, really important to get with those clients.
Absolutely.
Well,
nice to meet you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to chat with you.
Thank you both. I hope you enjoyed that session. Thanks for your questions and comments. We're only getting just under 3 hours with another panel, and you're able to leave any other questions or comments in advance of that chat, so the panel can address it. Thank you.